At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Easy now, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. If this is not the first of these podcasts you've heard, then you'll know that I typically keep my promotional chat to a minimum. But every now and then, I have to put a little ask out into the ether to help me spread the word and to put this thing on a few more people's radars to hopefully enjoy and take inspiration from. I'm humbled to say that thousands of tree-curious people have now given the Meaning of Trees podcast a whirl, and there's a dedicated core of you folks out there that are fully invested in checking out every new episode. So a special thanks to you guys for regularly hanging out at this virtual tree of knowledge we've been creating together. My ask, though, if you don't mind, is to take a few seconds to rate the show, especially if you listen regularly on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Any help with this side of things would be very much appreciated. And if you want to leave a comment, that's even better. Maybe share your favourite moment or episode so far. I'd love to hear about it. Nice one. And so, my guest today is going to help us all get a better understanding of an alternate universe where miniature trees rule the world. Bonsai connoisseur Amelia Williams has been studying and working with trees of all sizes for more than 20 years, most recently as director of UK tree consultancy firm, the Arb Company. Get ready to hear her waxing lyrical as I learn all about tiny tree craft, and we discuss what bonsai culture can teach us about better looking after bigger trees as well as ourselves. Amelia, welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. We're here at Sheffield Park today, where you've come to have a good look around at the tree collection. So many incredible tree specimens here. But I've cornered you to have a chat because when we met on the Vet Cert course that I was helping to lead at the Vine last year, you were telling me about your bonsai collection, and then you showed me some photos, and it's incredible what I've learned from those pictures and from that short conversation. And I really wanted to go into more detail about it. So welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Tom. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I had an ulterior motive also for being here because my mentee is here, Bex Kuma. And I'm really pleased to see her in our workplace this afternoon. And actually, Steve's going to tour us. He's already done a quick tour around the park and garden this morning, but I've never been here either. So it's amazing to bring all those features together.
So we're going to really zoom in on mini trees in a little bit. Before we go there, though, I'd like to know a bit more about yourself and how trees have come to play such a significant role in your life. So, Amelia, what do trees mean to you?
Gosh, I would say everything. Most people, I suppose, who know me know that my passion is trees, and I probably pay more attention to trees than I perhaps do always people. I just love everything about them, the whole sense that you get when you're with them, the feelings, the calmness that trees bring, the inspiration that they also bring to you. And it's just incredible. And I suppose it stems from childhood and climbing trees as a child and just enjoying the outside. I'm an outdoor person. I'm not very good inside. I get very easily sort of distracted. I'm probably quite destructive inside. And when I had my first job in a local authority as a temp, the first thing they wanted to do, which is how I got into the tree industry, was they sent me out with the tree officer because I was very destructive in the office. I wanted to keep changing things and do things quickly and efficiently. And back in local authority days, they were using microfiche and green screens, and everything was typewriters. Of course, it shows my age. And realizing that actually up until that age, I hadn't appreciated there was a career in trees and I could study something and then actually have a job outside. So that was where it all started, from watching tree surgeons from the 87 storms in ropes and harnesses, climbing trees. Where we lived, we had a huge amount of devastation after the 87 storms, which took months to clear up. And sort of looking at that, and actually when I had my GCSE assessment as to your career, I came out as a forester. But it was an industry or an area I never explored until in my 20s, because it was very much, follow academic, go to A-levels, go to do a degree. And I was fortunate enough to do a degree in geography at Royal Holloway. But even then, I was studying more sort of the rivers and ecology and environmental management. So I hadn't really still found the tree industry at that point. And it was only when I went to work for a local authority that I then suddenly found the role of a tree officer, and that's what kickstarted my arboricultural career.
That's really fascinating. And actually, the last episode before this one, I was having a chat with a secret guest, which I'm very closely related to. But yeah, out of that came a discussion about how the 87 storm had really impacted my own formative years in connecting with trees, or perhaps how I might view them today with a protection focus. And I've just got another question for you about how you entered the tree world, I guess. And being a female, how have you found that? Because obviously you're absolutely killing it at the moment, but let's be honest, it is a male-dominated industry, or certainly has been traditionally. So how have you found that?
To be honest, it has been a real sort of fun experience, because you realize that the value of different personalities, different people, and finding the right people to connect with. And that connection was all because we love trees and we wanted to be passionate about trees, that it didn't really affect me in a huge amount of a way. I sort of academically was fairly astute and able to progress quite quickly. Practically, there were elements I wasn't perhaps so good at. I'm hypermobile, so therefore my joints don't stay in place when I tree climb. So having to have them put back in every so many weeks when you're in a harness, because early doors, I'm talking about now going back 20 odd years, that the early climbing harnesses and the equipment for tree industry was very male dominated. One size fitted all. And you had this enormous great coat that you just think, my goodness, it's extra large, because they didn't do small sizes of things. And trying to get a climbing harness that fitted, because they hadn't really catered for the female physique. They were some of the sort of more practical challenges around, again, when you're on site and there's no facilities, and getting used to realizing how to train your body to cope without good facilities on site. It's just the nature of outside work, and you have to be quite resilient. Problem solving is a real key to how you sort of cope with some of those situations, that you think, right, what do I need to do in my day to make sure that you properly feed and hydrate yourself? Because you're trying to do a physical, practical tree job, but at the same time, you realize that there's no toilet. So there were some few practicalities around understanding your own body, your own needs, I suppose, but then also linking it up with the needs of the team. And that was what I think I loved with the tree industry, bonding with your team, with your colleagues. And there were no barriers in relation to that. People are people, and it was just an enjoyable sort of wealth of sharing knowledge. And I think after practically being able to prove to people you can climb and you can use a chainsaw and do the work, that then meant that you bonded better, because you could then actually link your skills with others, and they just saw you for your abilities as opposed to anything else. I suppose, but also being generous with their time. I was very fortunate. I met some really generous people with their time. And as you go through the industry, that was really quite crucial, is just being in the right place at the right time to meet the right person who was willing to share their knowledge and experience and help you along your journey, particularly early doors, practically, like someone like Tony Derbyshire. He's trained so many young arborists, and his confidence and faith in you as a person was just what inspired you to get up the tree. And the fact that he made you feel safe and secure, that you would climb regardless of whether you had your own fears, because he was there at the bottom of the tree going, you can do this.
We all need that person sometimes when we're learning, don't we? That's championing us on our shoulder. And it helps us then face into more difficult times. That's really lovely to hear. I know as well that you worked alongside the Ministry of Defence for 10 years as well. So tell me a bit more about that. Soldiers and trees, like how did those two get on, and what kind of reflections have you got of that time?
It was a really exciting time because they'd never had their tree stock fully inventorised. The first thing we did within the first few years very quickly was to get all the trees assetized and inventoried on the system, and then to get to study them. So it wasn't just doing a survey one-off, it was then going back to trees. It was understanding how trees work, how they function, looking at them, and that observational style of you could tell which trees were struggling just by knowing them well enough that you could see the subtle changes in the canopy colour or the limb that was slightly sagging, and every time a tree failed, that was one of the key things that we got to investigate. We wanted to know, why did it fail? What was the reason? What could we ascertain from everything around it? That it was drought? Was it because the tree was reaching a certain development age? Was it because it had a fungus or an infection? Or was it that someone had hit it with a tank, or a whole host of reasons why trees sometimes fail? Or was it just a freak of nature with wind changing direction? We were doing a lot of work around the garrisons. So that was one thing we really understood very quickly, was when a building came down, the local microclimate and dynamic changes of wind patterns. And that really was something we hadn't really expected or intended for, because it wasn't really thought of. And then you suddenly watch an entire sort of line of conifers suddenly pop over, and you're like, damn it, it's something we've got to look at more closely before we impact the environment so heavily. A lot of tree planting went on, so you got to learn a huge amount around actually replacement planting. We were looking after some really incredible old trees, so you could actually see the resilience in the older trees. And the same with watching beech populations with beech trees and the various stages of fungal infection and how they adapted and evolved and managed it. And sometimes we intervened perhaps too soon, but through experience you realise that there were times when you should or shouldn't intervene, and that trees, if given time, can sort themselves out. So it was a huge learning experience. I suppose because of their interest in keeping soldiers safe in their home environments. If a tree limb failed, if a tree fell over, you got that opportunity to go in and study it. Mm. And you learnt so much from that. And when I first joined, everything from a minor small limb branch dropping on the floor to something big falling over a security fence, everything was investigated. And it was brilliant because you learnt so much from that. When you had storms coming in, they used to sort of sometimes laugh because they'd be like, oh, Amelia, what's going to fail this weekend? You'd sort of have that testing and you'd be like, oh, that beech over there might drop a limb. And then you come in Monday morning and it'd be like, right, which one did? And it's like, yep, that beech did drop the limb. And you're like, oh gosh, that's a bit spooky.
How many trees were there in total?
Gosh, we had about 40,000 individual assets on Arb Track. And then if you equated then the groups and woodlands, it was about 500,000 trees easily. Because it wasn't just areas inside the garrison. The military owned vast quantities of land outside the garrisons that are permissive access. So the public had a huge element of enjoyment of these spaces. So one of my most prestigious areas, well, actually lots of them, but Tidworth for the polo grounds, where we used to have now King Charles come and visit to play polo. And one of the areas that they used to park for the best security was actually under one of the big beech trees. It was one of the most secure areas on the polo ground sites for their security detail. And I was just like, could we move that? Because just parking under the tree, you just saw all the compaction, all the issues. And it was one of the beech trees that we were monitoring because it had a lot of area. And you just suddenly thought, I don't want to be responsible for a limb dropping in the height of summer on that sort of entourage. So it was trying to manage those elements. But at the same time, realizing that people came because the landscape was so stunning. It's a gorgeous area. Mm. And the same with one of the prestigious areas in Aldershot with the military cemeteries. They are stunning places to visit, and there's so much history, there's so much sort of also sorrow that goes with them. So you've got people coming in of all sorts of sort of levels of consciousness and trying to keep them safe, but also trying to maintain that calming, beautiful environment for them to come and sort of pray and be sort of respectful of the soldiers that sadly have passed. And so there were so many stakeholders that were beyond just the military. It was the wider populations. The camps are bigger than just military camps. It's that public engagement as well.
What I'd like to now move to talking about, if it's okay with you, is your particular fascination with bonsai trees. So when we met on that course, I think even my first question was, oh, is bonsai not a species of tree? So quickly you kind of very politely corrected me on that one. But yeah, what is a bonsai tree? Let's start with that, perhaps.
So the easiest way to describe it is the translation is a tree in a pot. So it can be any species of tree that you maintain in a pot or a container. That's the first point. And then in terms of how I got into bonsai, while I was studying, I used to collect tree species to learn. My poor parents, I used to bring back a tree from a tree nursery, like a full-size standard, to their small garden. And I would then go off and study and work and leave my poor parents, my mother particularly, with all those trees. So their garden is littered with ginkgos, katsuras. We've got the foxglove tree. We've got pagoda. Everything is there in their garden. And they were all in containers because they were all bought from nurseries, because I wanted to study how they grew. I wanted to look at leaf color. I wanted to look at all their features. And I thought the only way to do that, especially time frame, was to go to arboretums or parks and gardens. But I thought I could have my own. So brought them all home to their lovely garden and filled it full of containerized trees. And my mum was just like, well, some of them are struggling because they've been there quite a while. So it was trying to work out how to maintain them. So she thought, I know, I will go and learn about how to keep trees in containers. So she went off to actually Salisbury Bonsai Society and joined the club and said, Amelia, you would love this. This is amazing. You can learn so much more. So I went along and I joined my first bonsai club and started to learn the hobby of bonsai. And so some of the trees in the garden then got converted into bonsais from being standards. Others got set free. So some went to various people to go and actually properly plant out in a garden because they were just the wrong species for bonsai. So when you talk about which species are suitable, you can bonsai anything. So I have an Indian horse chestnut from a champion Indian horse chestnut in the borough that I worked in. I grew from seed and I have bonsai'd it. It will never make the most impressive bonsai because the leaf size is hard to reduce on a tree that's got like dinner plate size leaves. If you start with a species that already has a small leaf, like a nothofagus or a Chinese elm, you actually are already ahead of the curve because you've already got small leaf size. You don't have to do all the techniques to reduce the leaf size. So species choice is quite key. And then some species are better at rooting than others. So using species like your Styrex japonica, they're phenomenal rooting because they're more of a shrub than a larger tree. So you get really good fibrous pine roots. Whereas if you start with the thug of the redwoods, so like I love growing giant redwoods, they have enormous root capacity, but they need repotting at least twice a year because they try and climb out their pot because they're like, I want to grow big, and we're trying to keep them small. And then oaks are phenomenal. I love playing with oaks, but I might not in my lifetime get them to develop as quickly because they are fairly fast growers once you get them over the first initial going. But in terms of then annual rate of growth, they can sometimes be quite slow. They can sit for periods of time, a bit like a yew, and not grow at all. Sometimes hawthorn as well. If you don't agitate them more regularly, like a sheep nibbling them, you don't get the growth that you want. So each species has its characteristics of how it grows, but you only learn that from literally getting up close and personal and growing trees. And it's more than just growing trees, though. It's growing trees and observing how they respond. And so that's what bonsai brought to me, was the fact that firstly I can study every part of it. You get to take it out the pot, you get to examine its roots, you get to redesign its root system and watch how it redesigns its own. So I also grow tropical figs, and when you first repot them, they spend the first 3 to 6 months reorganizing the soil their roots are in, and they're quite messy in their pots. It's really weird, but they're a really fun one to grow because once they've sorted out their soil that you've re-given them, they then settle down and grow brilliantly. If you don't repot them, they get pot bound, and then you get all the issues with low vigor, low vitality. You don't get the growth. So you want your trees to be thriving. You want that growth because then you want to be able to prune that. And then the more pruning, the more redesign and shaping. I'm probably not the best bonsai artist. I like growing. And I call it playing because I just enjoy playing and growing trees. And the fact that in a pot you can move them around the garden, you can develop them to styles, and it comes on to then the veteran and ancient trees that after seeing when I first started the Oakley oak at Motter's Font, absolutely amazing tree. In my mind's eye, I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to try and replicate that as a bonsai? And so one of the species that's easy to use to do that is actually, I've got 2 at the moment in progress, which are Chinese elms. So not oaks, but they look like partly now the Oakley oak. I'm developing that really fat, massive trunk with some really short, stubby branches. And then I thought, but wouldn't it be nice to do it with an oak? So I now have found the oak. So I have it at home. It's about the size of a football. He's literally this round. You can't see because we're on podcast, but
imagine a football.
Imagine a football with a few stub branches, and I'm now trying to grow a little canopy off him, and he's just incredible. I've been practicing my carving, so back to then the tree side of things. I've got a mini still handheld chainsaw.
How big we're talking?
Probably about 25 centimeters.
Okay.
And it's a brilliant little device, and you can just carve out some of the branches, recreating some of those veteran and ancient tree features.
Wow.
And it's just so much fun because you then get to sort of also see how it responds to wounding and learning about callus growth. There's so many things you can translate from the things you're learning in bonsai to then large trees. We use a lot of fun things where you might weigh down a branch with weights. So for a bonsai, you're trying to put a branch in a certain position for a certain perhaps aesthetic. So you'll weigh the branch down with weights.
Yeah.
And
with rocks.
Yeah. And you can wire it in place, or you can guide them and tourniquet them. Another technique we're doing at the moment, I've got a lovely Chinese elm, which I stripped all the branches off one side. I've laid it down in the pot, so I created a mini raft. And it looks incredible. It's still early days in its development, but the fact that off the stripped branches, it's now rooted, and the way that trees can quickly sometimes adapt to what you've done to them, to put out those adaptitious sort of buds or roots, and to literally turn a part of the tree into something else. So one minute it's branch, next minute it's now going to be a root. And you just think they are so fascinating.
So adaptable.
So adaptable. And everything we've learned from like the most recent courses with tree architecture, tree morphophysiology, all of that comes in with the tree biology, tree health. It all links, and you suddenly think, my goodness, we're joining up the dots. But then we also use specialized soils. And you realize actually that the soil and the roots, for me, was the most important part of the tree that encourages you to understand how and what they need, what rooting environment. Some trees really like wet, moist soil. And when you see that description when you're buying a tree, or it likes this or it likes that, you actually really get to understand that when you do bonsai, because you can test it out in different soils. So you can use various structured soils. We use a lot of the Japanese soils like Akadama, Kanuma, Kiryu, the different mixes you can put into them. It's incredible to then watch how the tree responds. And aeration, I would say, is something we really underestimate with trees, is that aerated soil, that friability, that ability for the roots to be able to take what they need from the soil, and compacted ground and the impact of that. So when we have a bonsai tree that's not been repotted, its root system is just literally starved of oxygen, and you can watch that impact then on the tree. So the tree is very quickly telling you with your observational sort of keys as to what it needs.
Yeah, because the stakes are so much higher, aren't they? So just to kind of help our listeners understand that from Amelia's collection, we have this tiny little oak. The trunk is about the size of my thumb. I've got quite chunky thumbs, but still. And it's got about 15 leaves on it. And how old is this tree?
It's about 25 years
25 years. So in terms of the stakes being high, like any little bit you nip off of that tree, or any change you make to the soil, is going to be a hyper-focused kind of decision to make, isn't it? So I can absolutely see why you're so into this. And since I first asked you this question, you've just absolutely come alive, by the way. And I find it quite interesting because, listeners, you won't know this, but behind Amelia, there's a picture on the wall. So we're in an archive room at Sheffield Park, and there's a guy with a super straight, serious face. And he's kind of like eclipsing Amelia. I didn't plan it this way, but I'm going to take that moody man's kind of devil's advocate vibe here. And I'm going to say to you, what would you say to people who would say that this is kind of all like torture to trees? And, you've talked about binding them and pulling them this way, that way, sawing off little bits, keeping them in a little pot. I'm painting the picture here that you're a kind of villain in doing this.
So I would say that in terms of bonsai and how we look after them, they are pampered pets. They are the most highly looked after and cared for trees. Oh my goodness, I'm out there every day for a start. I look at my trees at least twice a day, if not more. I work on them and maintain them. I feed them all the time. I look for observational things that might be causing them problems. I even build particular areas in the garden to protect them from the wind or the sun or the rain or the shell. So my goodness, they get so much love and attention. In terms of restrictions, because they're constantly being repotted, you're refreshing their environment. You're giving them more than they could ever get in the wild. My trees can't move out of their pots, very similar to a tree that's in a parkland situation, but I can refresh its soils. I can take it out of its pot, give it a whole new lease of life. And one thing I've learned with keeping for the trees as bonsai and also doing Nowaki with garden pruning is that actually the more attention and love you give to the trees, the better they are. They thrive. They don't just survive. And when you meet people with a bonsai collection that hasn't grown, you then ask them what their feeding regime is, what their watering regime is, what their repotting regime is. And they're like, oh, I don't feed, I don't water. It mirrored how when I first got into the tree industry, a lot of people don't prune. A lot of people don't feed their older trees. They assume that the tree can naturally sort itself out. But actually, if you think back, most of the trees we're looking at have been man-made. They've been either genetically modified, they're clones or they're cultivars. A lot of them have been grown in nurseries. They've got modified root systems already. And then we plant them out in a very foreign environment and expect them just to cope. But minor interventions, like if you've got a dying tree, you think, do we need to just watch it die? Or could we have intervened earlier? Could we have given it a bit of a pick-me-up with mulch? Could we have given it a liquid seaweed with a water drench? Could we have taken some of the weight off the crown, thinned out the old debris to stop a branch failing? We could have done all those things, but why don't we? And so I learned from doing bonsai that the fact that actually if we intervene, which we are all the time intervening with bonsai, but probably more so than we would ever in the larger tree industry because of economics, but if we do intervene, it's actually so much better for the trees if we do it the right way. And so I'm not saying intervention just for the sake of it, but just having realized that pruning both root and shoot revitalizes the tree, learning from bonsai, realizing that pruning is not bad as long as it's done in the right way. And if we're pruning trees that are fairly healthy, that respond well, the more you prune them, the better they become. And I'm not saying that every tree needs intervention, but realizing that you can at points intervene and actually improve a tree's longevity. When we do exhibitions with bonsai, a lot of people say, oh my goodness, that must be so cruel. But you think, no, they are so well cared for. They're so well pampered. I will laboriously go around and pick off by hand scale insect or any infection they have. So when you take them to places, I'm more worried that I'll get an infection if I take them out of their closed environment. Mm-hmm. So they are very well looked after.
Well, you absolutely knocked it out of the park in answering that devil's advocate question. And I guess what you're speaking to is this understanding that trees have evolved to deal with change and disturbance. And there's always a level, isn't there, of whether it's a sustainable amount of intervention or what we might term as damage. But actually, yeah, it can be beneficial to them to have a bit of that. And now I've got a bit of a surprise for you because I thought I've got this bonsai doctor coming to town. I've absolutely got to show Amelia my own bonsai tree, my only bonsai tree, and one that's still going. But please go to town on critiquing the condition it's in. What could I do better with it? I'm just going to grab it. Okay, if you just bear with me a second. Long pause. Not supposed to do that in a podcast. So let me just tell you a bit about this tree. So what do I know about it is that it's a Chinese elm. And the second thing is that I water it every sort of 5 days. I put it in a little bath of water and I have pruned it occasionally. So if it grows too many new leaves, I think if it gets to like 7 on one little shoot, I'll take it back to 2. And then I sometimes tear those up and put them down as a little natural mulch for the soil. And the other thing to say is that My wife sometimes gets jealous of this tree. Or actually what she says is, Tom, why do you always spend so much time on that one tree when all the rest of the house plants are getting no attention from you? And so occasionally it's a bone of contention, but I'm definitely attached to it. And it's still going. That's the main thing. But yeah, what's your assessment as someone that's seen thousands of bonsai trees? What are you thinking?
How long have you owned him?
I've owned this tree for about 2 years.
Okay.
It was a gift to me from Chloe, who I work with in my National Trust day job.
So it's in survival mode rather than thriving.
Okay.
So with Chinese elm, they should be pushing everywhere. You should be getting extensions all the time of every part.
Okay.
So at the moment, you've got very little back budding.
Yeah.
You've got very old leaf and sort of quite static growth.
Just to say, guys, I will put a photo of this bonsai tree on the socials and you can see what it's like. But yeah, compared to Amelia's thumb-sized trunk, this one is about 20 centimeters tall. It's a twisted trunk. I guess it must have been made like that when they potted it. And it's probably got about 40 to 50 leaves all over it and several side branches. Sorry, carry on.
So in terms of, you've got a build-up of calcium limescale on the trunk, which again, and if you've had it, have you ever repotted it?
No.
So its soil looks incredibly tired.
Oh, okay.
Really degraded.
Yeah.
So really sort of, if you're only watering it once every 5 days, this time of year I'm watering mine twice a day.
Oh, really?
Wow. And so they would be in a much more free draining soil, which would mean that the root system is much more active, which basically then means that if you've got a fibrous and functioning root system, you get more growth. So how often are you feeding it?
I don't feed this tree.
So this poor tree in 2 years has had to survive on less than, gosh, it's not even the size of a Malteser box.
Damn. So I'm actually a tree torturer and I didn't even know it. And my wife's going to be so happy to know that I need to give this tree even more attention.
So are you keeping it inside permanently?
Yeah.
So again, if you're keeping a Chinese elm inside, and they can be kept inside, are you keeping it on a grit tray or a moisture humidity tray?
No.
So one of the things to help it would be firstly repot and keep it in the same size pot. You'll just trim the roots and refresh the soil, and possibly you could put some organic matter in with the soil like you have been collecting the leaves. That's a really good way of putting in, but literally crush it down. I would say use a food mixer to mulch it, but someone might like that.
I've used some small scissors at one point.
Yeah, you can, or you can just dry it even more and then just mix it in with the soil. Is it wired into the pot? No. So in terms of stability, it's going to be wobbling around in the pot when you carry it around and move it. So when you repot it, you would wire it into the pot.
All right.
So that it won't then produce more structural roots. You'll get more fibrous. So once it's wired in, it's secure. So it can divert resources then just purely to fibrous root rather than structural root. These are a fairly sort of standard pot, and you might find that there's also wet pockets inside the pot.
Yeah, the pot, by the way, is about the size of a butter tub.
Yes, margarine. Yes. And sometimes they have little wells inside where they're mass produced that can mean that water sits in, which is why it's quite stagnant. And so you might need to change the pot to a slightly better ceramic. But then wire it in, you've got holes in the bottom that also should be filled with mesh to stop things going into the tree. So because it's kept inside, you might not get things like snails and wood lice.
No, sure.
But you would still put a little mesh in to stop the soil washing out. And then you would put your wire through and wire it to secure it in place.
Yeah.
And then refresh the soil would be the key thing. And then every time you water, you could water with a very diluted liquid seaweed just to give it a tonic.
Can I get that from the beach?
You can make your own liquid seaweed, but otherwise you would just buy an organic one from a local wholesaler gardening place. But in terms of, you don't have to choose a specialist soil. You can make your own soil mix, but it needs to be something that drains well, because particularly if you're hydrating it regularly, you're doing the technique where you dunk them and you then do you wait for all the bubbles to finish?
I didn't look at any bubbles, but I'm just going by the leaflet that came with the tree and kind of hoping for the best a lot of the time.
No, that's fine. And it's absolutely survived, which is great. A lot of people go, I had a bonsai once and it died. I can always be one of those as well. I've had many bonsai and they've died because I didn't understand the conditions that particular species needed. So again, what you're finding is that you've also got very one-sided growth.
Yeah.
So you need to put it on a rotisserie.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes put it on the windowsill for a little holiday and the other way round.
So rotate it, and I would suggest every week or 2 weeks you rotate it.
Okay.
At the moment, if you think of a two-dimensional bonsai, it's quite one-sided. I'm looking and thinking, there's a...
I actually made sure that I presented to you the
better
growing side. Yeah.
Growing side. And then in terms of pruning, you want these little pads to be dense.
Yeah.
At the moment, on each leaflet, you've got 4 to 5, but not through pruning, through lack of vitality.
Sure.
So when you prune Chinese elm, you would prune back to 2 little leaflets initially, and then start to build the density back forward. So at the moment, you're getting long extensions, but getting big leaves on the end because the tree is just trying to survive. It's pushing out large leaves at the end or leaflets. So prune them back to 2, you'll find that then it backbuds, and then you can build pads out forward again. So each of these should be really nice lined out little pads. And this is where then your styling comes in, because you then think, well, do you want that one to be slightly lower down? So choose your front, and then you can start to guide the branches into position.
Yes.
Or just prune them.
I've enjoyed that bit of it. So when I have gone to prune, I've enjoyed sort of standing back, looking at it and trying to imagine what's the most archetypal kind of bonsai look to it, with the scrawny canopy that it has.
And in 2 years, it should be a much denser canopy if you had been given the right instructions. So in terms of hydration, and especially because it's inside, it will need more than just a once a week soak.
Sure.
In the soil it's in, this is the original soil it probably came in, it's like a coconut coir, but it doesn't have a huge amount of aeration. And so it is literally just sat in a fairly claggy wet mix, and it will slowly rot off. So you'll find your root system rots and then they start to decline. Yours isn't at all. It's still in a fairly nice green condition with quite tired leaves, that it's not popping.
When I went to Fiji last year, I was there for 3 months. My next door neighbour, Dan, who actually helped me set up the podcast initially when it was just a seed of an idea. So shout out to Dan. But yeah, he kindly said he'd look after the tree for me. And I know he felt a big responsibility, but it was a bit shabbier actually when I got it back. But I guess that must happen a bit like, you've described the level of attention you need to give these little trees. You essentially need to mollycoddle them to keep them going and keep them in the best health, really. So that's no reflection on Dan. I'm sure he had many other things to do than just keep my tree going as well. But I have brought it back from that place. But it's great to get your advice on how I can help it further from here. And I'll definitely take that away. I've got some other questions about bonsai more generally. So what's the oldest bonsai tree in the world that you're aware of?
Oh my goodness. So again, some of the ones in Japan and China are through generations. So they've gone through families entire. So I think probably one of the ones I was reading about is about 800, 900 years old. And there's some in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. And if you read the labels, the age can be a bit deceptive. And sometimes because of the way we create trees, there's a term called tanuki, which is a wraparound. So you get a really old piece of wood and then you grow young trees around it. And then over time you make sure they fuse. So it looks as though that really old piece of wood is really ancient. And then you've got some vibrant young shoots.
I mean, that's amazing in itself.
Yes.
It can even fuse into that.
Yeah.
But I guess, it's cheating a little bit, right?
It's not. The art of bonsai is to make things look older than they are. And the same with this lovely little elm. The old detailing and the ruggedness of the bark, the features, you're thinking, my goodness, it's got some really old features.
Yeah.
And that's what you're trying to mimic. And sometimes you mimic those through scoring the bark or damaging it. But that's when you also learn that a tree can recover from bark damage or impact wounding. We use in bonsai lots of different sealants, which I know the tree industry at large has moved away from the 1970s sealing wounds. But actually, the hormones in them actually promote callus growth. And if you want the rolling callus over the edge of a wound because you're trying to occlude over, like the one at the top here, at the top of your bonsai, you haven't quite got a fully occluded wound.
No.
But if you then scored that, the tree would then callus over quicker, but you score it and then apply the wound putty, you'll get a good response, that you'll then occlude that wound quicker so that the visual will be perhaps better, but actually you can carve out that wound as well to make it look even older. And you could actually carve that down following the necrotic bark behind, and you could have like it's been hit and lost the top through a lightning strike. So that's what's so fun with bonsai, because you can really create little images and think. We don't often carve so much on broadleaf, so more so with conifer you tend to have those enormous great, we call them sharis and gins, where you'll even strip off the bark and we'll even paint them with lime sulfur to turn them really white. Because you're trying to look for that really white to grey weathered.
Yeah, like, you think of like the bristlecone pines,
exactly,
the oldest living species today, and that is completely bleached white, isn't it? And contorted, twisted, with little sprigs of growth on the end of it. And I love the thought of you replicating the Oakley oak at Mottisfont as well. That's a tree really special to me, and in my National Trust day job, that's like the oldest oak tree that I helped to look after. And I think it's in the top 20 of oldest oak trees of that species in Europe, actually. And its main trunk, like you say, what we call its bole, is just got this incredible kind of galaxy of different greys and textures going on. It is absolutely fascinating to get up close to and touch as well. And the thought that you could have a mini version of that in your house, to me, that's super, super cool. And I totally get why you're into this.
And it's amazing because you meet some bonsai artists, and there's some phenomenal bonsai artists in the UK and also in Europe and around the world. And the community is vast. I think there's, on the latest one of the bonsai chats on socials, there's about 70,000 members. The passion for bonsai, and for people that aren't tree people, these are people that just enjoy the hobby for whatever reason, whether it's for mental health, whether it's for their just peace of mind, whether they're just enjoyment, it's a hobby, it's a retirement, or it's just something to get away from the day job. They've got so much knowledge and skill, and some of them, their carving work is phenomenal. Others, it's tree health. I do a lot of recovery, so a lot of people lend me their trees for a holiday while I recover their health and then send them back. So I've just recovered a fig that had a plaited bark that was really going through a tired phase. It hadn't been repotted for about 10 years. It came to me for a 6-month holiday, got it back into good health again, and now it's gone back home, and with a guidance note on follow-up. And so it's been really fun to have your own specialism even within the field of bonsai. Some people are amazing stylists, some people are amazing sort of designers, some people are brilliant growers. We also grow a lot of trees because you just want to start them off and understand how they function, what their roots do. And
well, so many people want to make a difference with the environment, issues that we've got. And yet, actually, I was thinking the other day, how many people in the world today genuinely have room for even a tree in their living space, you know? And this is a way to bring trees and all the wonders of them into your house as well, and to really appreciate those and to have a relationship with a tree. And this might sound a little bit like I'm just making a popular reference, but generally, I used to love the Karate Kid movie, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if you've seen it, but it holds up all right, actually. Obviously, there's a little bit of stereotyping around how Mr. Miyagi is portrayed, but he's really into his bonsai trees. And of course, he's trying to coach Daniel in discipline, right? Working with the forces of nature and relating that to himself, and a kind of wax on, wax off. But, that's like kind of push and pull, isn't it, with daily life? And so I think for that reason, I'm aware that bonsai is more than just, looking after a small plant, but there's perhaps more to it than that. And you've sort of spoken to it a bit there by saying about how invested people are with it. But do you think there is a sacred element to it? And what are the roots of that?
I definitely think there is. It's hard to explain. It's just when you go out and you sit with your collection and you start to work on it, there's a sense of calmness, and then there's a real sense of, I suppose, the inner artist, that creativeness comes out. I was never, because of GCSE choices, I was never allowed to do art. So I did all the sciences, and art was never on my radar. I was never allowed to do the sort of creative bit. And so to be able to tap into that and have the free rein, but also realizing that you can sometimes try and force a tree to do what you want. You can put wire on it to wire it down into a position. But what's so fun about trees is if they don't like it, they will just bounce back and do what they want. And so you can't force yourself on nature. You have to work with them. So you work out how a tree grows, you work out what it should look like, what it wants to be, and work with it. So a good example would be like the giant redwoods and trying to force them to stay small, but thinking, actually, can I work with them and encourage their growth to get them to grow quite quickly when they're young, so I get that large impact, so I get good growth, but then to try and slow it down, but in their tree time. And so you learn to work with trees and understanding what they need from you. I read a fantastic, and I think it was to do with one of the podcasts and books around actually trees and plants are actually manipulating people and actually telling us what they want. And sometimes we don't see it, but actually we have houseplants. We've brought them into our homes. We've found that relationship with them. And it's exploring that further and going, well, actually, what motivates me to go and water them every day, to go and prune them, to feed them. And they're not talking to me per se.
No, they've evolved to have an appeal to us. And I think it's about my cats, honestly, the life they lead. And just think, are we really ruining the world, or are these,
And I think that's with plants, and we surround ourselves with them. And I'm out there thinking, my goodness, how many hours a day am I spending tendering to them, spending quite a lot of funding on them as well, because you think sort of by the time you bought the soils.
How much are we talking?
Quite a lot, really. It's particularly if you're buying an established bonsai.
Yeah.
I think probably the most expensive one had a few zeros on the end.
Wow.
And because you've invested in a tree with a few £1,000s, you then want to give it the right conditions, the best conditions.
Yeah.
Even the fact that I even commission pots for my trees. There's some amazing ceramic artists out there. One of my favorites is Gordon Duffy. He makes the most incredible pots. And so you will go and you will say, can I have a pot of this dimension, this depth? I want this finish. Even you choose right down to the color of the pot, the finish you want. And when you know that you've potted that tree in the most incredible pot as well, the tree is elevated. And then also there was a lovely furniture maker who I commissioned to make some wooden stands. So when you're showing your trees, you take it to a whole new level, because it's not just the tree, it's the pot, it's the stand, it's the display. And that's where you also realize we're perhaps not as in touch with the aesthetic in relation to when you understand how that negative space, the arrangement of the tree, that golden triangle, I suppose.
Like the voids in the canopy being just as significant as where things are growing, right?
Absolutely. And I'm still in the very infancy of understanding the sort of more Asian and sort of historic and cultural art of displaying trees. When you set up what's called a tokonoma, and it's basically like a little window into the sort of soul of the tree. And it's there, and you've got a beautiful scroll, which could be a painting that promotes the season that's to come or the season that's been. And you've got your tree sat there with possibly a tiny little accent, which might be a little moss ball. It could be just one blade of bamboo. And the meaning behind sort of the species of tree with the accent, with the scroll, it's a phenomenal thing. I'm still in the infancy of learning and understanding it, because it's something we're not taught. And having spent time in Japan, you realize from a very young age in sort of different cultures, they're taught the appreciation of aesthetics, of nature. And it's something I haven't seen so much in Western culture. You understand that actually to take time out and to sit and just be at one with just sitting. I'm a very active person, but to actually give myself a break, and actually the fact that when I do bonsai, I can just sit. I can spend time just admiring and working out how I'm going to style or prune the tree. It's really good downtime, and it's probably one of the only times I'm probably sat still, because I've got a lot of trees to prune, and it's a really nice cathartic thing. But otherwise, you're just running at 90 miles an hour through your life.
Yeah.
And so that appreciation of taking that time out, having that, I don't know, have you done the traditional tea ceremonies? And and the time it takes, but it's amazing amount of time that's good quality time. It's not, oh, I'm going to make a cup of tea really quick.
We're all hardwired on coffee these days,
Yes.
but how often do we actually just stop and really, smell those coffee granules, for example, and really take it in and, just think where that's come from? And I guess it speaks to gratitude as well, right?
Yes, and there's so many good things in life to be grateful for, and trees are just, I don't know, that there's just something about them that are just magical and just make you enjoy sort of the aesthetics, but everything about them. They're a living, evolving and changing and adaptable creature, really, that's an amazing species that's just also so fragile but so resilient. And when you watch a tree, even like the mulberries are phenomenal, that they can collapse and then grow again, like the whole phoenix trees. That just, there's so many things that we don't yet know, that I just think, if we have to keep studying, keep observing and keep enjoying. One of the good things with bonsai, it has taught me calmness, it has taught me patience. They are two of the key things that I just didn't have in my life. Like that whole taking time out to just enjoy sitting, to just enjoy admiring, rather than, right, where can I go to the next thing? I want to see the next thing. And I love watching like bumblebees the other day. We've got a bird boxer putting up these lovely birch bird boxes, and watching what things use them, and whether it's birds, whether it's fungi. One of them's been taken over by the amazing maize girl fungus. And just watching nature, and I never would have done that. Whereas now, actually, it's taking the time out to just watch the newts playing in the pond, or actually just in between, because you're working from home, popping out into the garden to have 10 minutes of just admiring what's going on in the garden at different seasons.
Well, thank you so much. That has been such a rich treasure trove of information about the mini universe that is bonsai care and appreciation. And I'll be really surprised if this chat hasn't inspired at least one person out there to go and get themselves a bonsai tree to help center themselves and learn more about trees. And I guess have a hand in creating something beautiful. And I'm going to just ask you the final question now for our listeners out there and people interested in trees. What would be your final message?
I think for me, it would be go out and propagate, grow, and actually explore growing your own tree. And everyone sort of who gets into bonsai is just like, sometimes it's quicker to buy, but actually the enjoyment of growing and the fun of watching this little seed pop up and then following its journey and being part of its journey with it is just incredible. We're currently growing some little Japanese black pines from seed, and that first, like, oh my gosh, they popped up. You've just got and then learning with them and understanding that. And it's for me, it's taught me so much of actually just growing and enjoying the journey, not worrying about the finished product, but actually that whole journey with trees and getting to spend time with them. For me, I would encourage everyone to just go out and find trees, start enjoying, having fun with understanding what trees need from us, what we can give them.
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And see you next time.